This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment.
Welcome back to Weights and Wealth. Coming to you not live from Charleston. Today we'll be discussing weight loss, housing markets, and even some bond market stuff, just kind of different financial markets in the U.S.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit different kind of an episode here than we normally do. We're going to seam in an interview for the normal intro and talk part. Our shout out for this episode goes to Chris Naghibi, who we're going to be interviewing or just discussing with. He's been a really good mentor to us for the podcast and for the wealth side of things. He and Saeed have a podcast called The Higher Standard. It's a really good podcast. So if you're interested in finances and the Fed, go check out the Higher Standard podcast. I guess we'll just cut to the interview portion now with Chris. Thank you to Chris Naghibi for joining us. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at First Foundation Bank. Chris is also an attorney, a real estate broker, and a general contractor, as well as the host of the Higher Standard podcast, which is how I got connected with Chris. Highly recommend their podcast. They are the #1 financial literacy podcast, as they claim on the internet. So definitely go give it a listen if you like what Chris has to say.
Well, thank you, Ted. Sean?
Yeah, you could use a stronger word than claim. That makes it sound somewhat unsubstantiated.
I like to point out that podcast numbers aren't public, so until someone can prove me otherwise, you've only got the polls, my friends, and those can be manipulated and often are. So
yeah, I
appreciate
Nick,
you guys having us on.
I think Nick actually said we might be the #1 faith, finance, family, fitness, and freedom podcast on the internet. So
if you can sell it, if people believe in the dream, brother, that's all that matters. Just look at Jay Shetty. Sell the dream.
Gotta fake it till we make it, right?
Yeah, it works. If you're a good-looking Indian dude with light eyes, it actually works. You got Kim Kardashian, the Biden. I mean, it works.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, the reason we're having Chris on today is we wanted to go over something he said in one of the intro portions of a Higher Standard episode from January. So I'm going to read what Chris said in that episode, and then we'll kind of get into a discussion about it. So Chris said, if the bond market were managed correctly and the treasury markets were managed correctly, you wouldn't need income tax at all. It's because we have inefficient management in place and excess spending that these systems, which otherwise in and of themselves are strong and support what we do as a country, are not enough. Chris, I think a lot of our viewers don't have a lot of exposure to the bond market in general. We've covered the stock market quite a bit on our show and how to index long-term in index funds, but we haven't gone too much into the bond market. Real quick, before we get into what you said and how income tax comes into play, can you maybe explain to our listeners how the bond market works?
Yeah, nobody should feel bad if they don't understand how the bond market works. So there's a lot of people who are in the stock market pretty regularly, pretty consistently, who still to this day don't understand it. So I happen to know it by nature of the fact that I'm in the banking space, and bonds really drive a lot of what we do from a profitability standpoint. So I happen to know it because of that. But for most of America, it's kind of a mystery. So effectively, it's really facilitating debt for the government. When you buy a bond, you're buying government debt. And if you live in the United States and you're a red-blooded American, you believe that this country is the best country in the world. And as such, financially, it has always repaid its debts. So it's considered to be a low-risk thing. The government issues you a bond, and you get a return on your investment. Think of it as like a CD, right? The only difference is instead of giving your money to a bank and getting a guaranteed return, you're getting the money to the government in the form of a loan, And they're giving you this debt obligation in the form of a bond for this repayment, this vehicle. And generally speaking, the bond market is a pretty competitive place because if, let's say, in a healthy market, you can go out to the bond market and generally get a better return than you can holding cash. That's certainly the case right now, where they're very close and competing. There's some high yield savings accounts which get pretty close to it. But U.S. government's bonds, this debt that the government pays you, has historically been a very low risk and relatively super safe investment. And that's why it's so sensationalized. That's why other countries hold so much U.S. debt, right? So Japan, China, the UK, they all hold massive quantities of U.S. debt. They're buying U.S. debt and holding that as a good investment for good returns to themselves. Is that kind of good, like a broad stroke picture?
Yeah, I think that's really good. So with that, how would the U.S. manage the bond market and the treasury market to not need income tax? Because last year, the government collected $4.44 trillion in income tax. So that's a lot of money to make up. How would the government make money off the bond and treasury markets to supplement or make up for that income tax?
So to back it up, I like to take a holistic view, kind of a top-down view on this topic because I think it makes it more relatable. One of the things we have is a national debt, which is spiraling out of control. And it's really driven largely by the size of it and the fact that when the Fed increases the Fed funds rate, it increases the same debt payments that we have to pay on our national debt. So we're at 34, approaching $35 trillion. And if you look at the national debt and you zoom out to the 1950s to now, it looks like a hockey stick straight up.
Yeah.
This is coming at the same time that most American households have, well, all American households have in aggregate, the highest non-household debt they've ever had in history. And that's credit card debt, that's auto loans, student loan payments, all aggregate together. These things are all at their highest. As a matter of fact, they all, except for one category, student loans are at the highest. And student loans aren't at their highest because the Biden administration forgave so much of that. Like it or not, you've got a debt problem both at the consumer level and at the government level. Way back in the day, although Lincoln's era was the era that really came up with income tax, it was Milton Friedman's last administration where he worked with, I think it was World War II. I have to go back and check my wars there. I believe it was World War II where he came up with the infrastructure for what we now think of as modern day income tax. It was never designed to be a full-time consistent thing. It was supposed to be a wartime contribution. Now, income tax was around long before him, but he was kind of the last person that architected it before they said, hey, you know what? We like this. We're not going to stop it.
Yeah.
So the reason for the backstory here is normally the government's supposed to run without things like income tax because it was profitable, right? Because you made enough money from normalized taxation at different levels that income tax was not necessary. But we liked it so much post-war effort that we kept it. And frankly, that has led to a runoff of spending that far exceeds our budget. And we've been out of budget. There's lots of fees that can't be accounted for. A great example of this politically, if you go to the Pentagon and they've failed multiple budgets in a row. And you could argue there's some, secret stuff going on there that we as the general public don't need to know about. I don't care one way or the other. But what
So I'm
I
not
care
going to
about
argue
is
we've seen a lot of waste.
Yeah, you could. I mean, who knows? But again, I like to take the more conservative approach when it comes to these things and say, look, maybe the government is spending on some wild shit we're not aware of. Maybe they are. And maybe it's to protect all of us. You never know. And maybe they know things we don't know. So, could it be a conspiracy theory? Could it be good or bad? I don't know. But what I do know is the debt is spiraling out of control and we have more spending than we have income coming in even with this. So the bond market is a great example of when the spending gets wild, right? Mm-hmm. What is the government doing? It's taking on more debt to pay for things it cannot afford to do because we're spending more money than we're making at. It's a very simple level. So if these markets were managed more effectively, you wouldn't have the need for income tax the same way we didn't well before Milton Friedman in the last war effort. Okay. Kind of resonates a little bit there?
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, but do you think there is a potential reason behind the debt? Obviously, they talk a lot about hey, balance budgets. But do you think that potentially just as our geopolitical influence has kind of expanded since World War II, maybe, kind of like Hamilton talked about back in the days of the Revolutionary War, by bringing on some sort of national debt, these countries have an interest in our stability so that we'll be able to pay it back. And maybe as we kind of became this, I don't want to say world police, but kind of, the geopolitical hegemon that is supposed to at least control the transatlantic and trans-Pacific waterways, keep trade open, expand manufacturing, and free up new developing markets. By kind of shuffling that debt off, we're giving these up and coming nations like China, for example, an interest in our survival and an interest in us, continuing to, I guess, keep boots on the ground financially or militarily.
An economic dead man switch.
Well, and it's true. There's 100. I don't think it was as blatantly as intentional as that. I like to think that absolutely plays a part in it. But frankly, I think that we've been a lot more interconnected internationally than we recognize for a long period of time. And you can take the geopolitical conflict. You can look at Ukraine and Russia. You can look at Israel and Palestine. You can look at North Korea's strange behavior. And you can look at the things that we've done to intermediate these places and all these threats. No one's actually acted on anything across the U.S. And maybe that's part of the reason why. Maybe this financial stability that they're worried about and the repercussions of the echoing effects in their economies play a part in that. Certainly. I can't deny that. But what I can tell you is there are some simple things that don't make any sense to me. And I'll give you a great example. Social Security for my mother. My mother is almost 70 years old now. She gets about $1,700 a month in Social Security. And it's not a lot of money. It's really not. I posted recently on TikTok of all my co-host, who doesn't even have a TikTok account. It's 1.3 million views on a TikTok that we posted about saving money. And it was about putting a couple $100 a month away, starting in your 20s. And by the time you hit 65, you basically have $1 million guaranteed. And there was all sorts of criticism about it, talking about the effects of compound interest, that $1 million in 40 years from now won't be worth more than $280,000 if you account for inflation with an average inflation rate. But then I thought to myself, this is so dumb. We're spending trillions of dollars internationally. And I heard something else from one of the guys from the All In podcast the other day that really resonated with me. If you took $20 billion every single year, and I know it sounds like a lot of money, but relative to how much money we're spending every single year, it's not. If you took $20 billion and you basically gave, I think it was $7,000 to every child born that year, it's changed them up to about $20 billion. And you gave it to them the day of their birth in a retirement account invested in low-cost index funds. They would be guaranteed millions by the time they retired if that happened on day one. And yet, why aren't we doing that for our citizens? Why, if that is true, and we're making the conscious choice to make sure that the U.S. is stabilized by spending money and supporting our allies and taking on debt so that they're invested in us, why aren't we investing back in the same people who we're supposed to be protecting in the same measure? A $20 billion solution like this is not a big swing if you look at government spending. And it guarantees that you, me, and everybody else, the day we're born, have $1 million plus, if not, frankly, at that cadence, with extra 20 years, you're probably talking closer to $2 million. $2 million a day you retire. What a sensational idea that we don't do. So I look at theories like that and I think to myself, no, it can't be that. It just has to be that we spend more than we make, and we also have the ability to print the money, which is what got us to the problem that we're in now. Almost 1970s hyperinflation, at least that was a fear, when we hit 9.1% post-pandemic. Mm-hmm. So if these markets were managed correctly, you wouldn't have the need for so many of the things that you see done. But there is no benefit, frankly, for politicians to do that. If you solve all the problems, you don't need them.
Well, that's the thing with Social Security, that solution. I think Nick and I talked about that in one of the early episodes of Weights and Wealth. When we introduced an article that was saying Social Security is basically already bankrupt and there's no money in it.
Yeah, totally.
But so even though that's a solution that would be better for everyone, the moment you say we need to alter or get rid of Social Security, everyone loses their mind and you become political nuclear waste. I think it happened to Rand Paul or one of the other Republican candidates back in 2016 in those primaries. Mm-hmm. Someone said something about we need to get ahead of the Social Security issue, and they were just immediately nuclear. And
yeah, it's
a problem.
It's hitting your own self-destruct button politically. You can't do it. And that's where you take a phased-in approach and you look at some of these things and you say to yourself, okay, if I can't say this, then here's what we do. We draw a hard line in the sand and say everybody gets Social Security for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time. I get it. But then what you do is you roll out this new plan in 20 years to where you've got a solution for people when they hit retirement age, right? It's just swapping things over time. And these are very simple, logical conclusions. I'm not a smart person. That sounds like a great idea. There's lots of people who are smarter than me who I guarantee you have better ideas than that. And yet we don't do anything. And it's because debt is also an instrument for control, too. Whether we like it or not, on a personal level, debt can be used to control you.
Yep.
And everything we've been taught to do growing up in the ecosystem that we're in since the 1920s, when the Vanderbilts, the Rothschilds, and so many wealthy families got together at the White House, this is not conjecture, this is real, it happened. You guys are the titans of industry. What do you need from us, the government, to make sure you have better employees who come and build? This is during the Industrial Revolution. Well, they said we need employees that are willing to be committed to our institution for a long period of time, who are going to follow orders, who are going to want to move up the chain, who are going to want to live a nice middle-class lifestyle. And that's what they got out of our educational system. It wasn't teach these guys how to be entrepreneurs, teach them about debt, teach them about wealth. And the whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses wasn't a mistake. It wasn't like this thing that just happened because of social media. It was because everybody wanted the same lifestyle, because everybody wanted to keep up with their bosses, and everybody wanted this almost effectively, and I hate to say it, this socialism-like consistency on opportunity. And it was only when we got to the point in society where we started seeing so much more of other people's lives with social media and everything else that entrepreneurship and the idea of it blew out of the way. And now you're seeing it, the younger demographic now, I'm talking early 20s, maybe even late teens, are saying, why would I go to college? Why would I take on that debt? If I'm going to buy a house, why would I want to be saddled with this debt for so long? Why don't I invest in this, or why don't I invest in that? And you can't blame them, because at the same time you see your government overspending and there's still no repercussions.
So I guess that brings us right back to the original question that we had on your comment. Is there any way that the government can make money off of those bonds to fill that gap from income? Because obviously we would all like the government to spend less money and get rid of income tax, but I don't see, based off the rise in spending over the last several administrations, both Republican and Democrat, it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. So is there a way to make your comment work without reducing government spending, or does it hinge on reducing government spending?
It's not solely based on reducing government spending, but it starts with a government accountability and transparency. I think that's kind of what the Freedom of Information Act really was intended to do, not necessarily specifically for this, but one of the elements that it absolutely could do. Because if you find out that spending, like we look at our military, we have the largest military in the world, and you got to love that, and you got to respect what it is and what it can do for our country and what that means to be a world power that's that dominant. But at the same time, can we scale back some of that spending reasonably to reinvest back in our community? Because guess what? What's the point of having the world's strongest military if you've got a country that's in disarray because everybody's living a shitty quality of life?
Yeah.
And that therein lies the question. It comes down to accountability. The same way I would tell someone to manage their own personal budget, I would tell the government, if you can't reduce your spending, okay, reduce your expenses. And therein lies somewhere the juxtaposition. A good example of why this is problematic on so many levels is I start to look at what the White House is doing currently. And love or hate the current administration, they're spending a whole lot of money. Student loan forgiveness is a great example of that. And I think in some contexts, for service members, by all fucking means, please forgive their debt. They've done their due diligence. They've done the right thing. But if you're low income and you've got a great degree, I would like to hear more about that situation first, right? But that being said, that's government spending while we're trying to reduce inflation. That literally props up the same number this independent agency is supposed to be reducing
directly
by bringing inflation down. It works against the Fed. And it works against the Fed in an election year where November 5th looming election is happening and everybody's trying to curry as much political favor as possible. And no side of the aisle wants to be the group in charge or in power or in the seat when the government got into a situation where inflation got out of control. So it's very bizarre. So you're seeing all these strange numbers coming out of the employment sector, and you're asking yourself, is this political? Is the White House influencing the Bureau of Labor Statistics to have the unemployment numbers, which are revised down in hundreds of thousands of job numbers after they're put out, but nobody talks about the revision. But at the same time, you have inflation numbers that are coming out that are clearly not being manipulated. So what's going on? I know it's like a lot of like competing polar topics, but the problem is that government spending is such a complex issue, which affects all of us on an individual basis, and it affects us all on a macro basis, that it's hard to talk about one without the other, if that makes sense.
What? No, I agree. It's just, I was thinking about, like, when you mentioned World War II, and then you're talking about, like, as a method of control, it reminded me of this, like, speech I read, like, a year ago, given by Beardsley Rummel, who was he was the chairman of the Fed of New York. And it was basically about the same thing, about how it was given, like, right after World War II. And it was like basically like, hey, like, we really do not need an income tax anymore. He was kind of going against the current administration, which I guess this was like kind of right at the climax of like, hey, are we going to keep this?
Yeah.
We're going to get rid of it. And he was basically saying that the only reason to have an income tax is to like make government policy felt on an individual level.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was like, that's like the most effective way of like kind of having the government like play aside essentially in the economy, because, you know, with discretionary spending like sales tax, okay, like they want to tax you the white monster, I'm just going to buy the red one. You know, it's like it can't really affect you. You know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, and I think that it's wildly interesting to me to see people. So I live in California, and it is probably the most untax friendly state in the country. And you know, when you go to other states, like we're corporate headquarters is now in Dallas, and it's a better tax situation there with state tax, but the real estate tax is higher. You know, we have a lot of business in Florida where obviously there's a better tax situation, and it's interesting to see. Like Hollywood's a great example of this too. Hollywood used to be the center of the film industry. And then you started to see the slow migration out of it. And now so many people you would otherwise look at as celebrities are leaving for one reason and one reason only: taxes. And of course, there's some who have political concerns, and there's a lot of homelessness in the state. But that all goes back to taxes. Why am I paying more money than anybody else and not ignoring the benefits of that when my state has weird politics and all these other problems along the way? Taxes are a core part of that decision making. That's the same reason why a lot of people move to Nevada. It's one state over. The weather's not nice. You're in the middle of the desert, but you don't have the state taxes, and people are making a community there again for families. So to that point, yeah, taxes. People forget about the Boston Tea Party, man. I mean, no representation, no taxation without representation.
That was over like a 2.3% tax.
Yeah. And look how far it's come. Humans are cattle, man. And I hate to say this in a stigmatized way. We're so tribal in how we think and how we act that people can rob you right in front of you. And as long as no one freaks out or no one says anything, it'll happen. Yet one person screams, and then everybody screams, and then everybody runs, and that's kind of how humanity works. We're very tribal in this regard. There's no better example of this than what happened during COVID, and I'm not going to get into the whole dynamic of it, but certainly everybody freaked out, and everybody did the same thing, and they went down that path, and now you're getting bits and pieces of information, and now it's labeled disinformation, and there's all these parties that are opposite sides of one another because nobody unilaterally agrees, and there's lots of smart people on both sides, and you ask yourself, how did this happen? And that's the same thing with taxes. How did it happen? We got here because it was this progressive load over time, and nobody freaked out.
Yeah.
And truly, I don't believe an income tax is necessary, and there's plenty of states that have evidenced that. I've been to Texas a lot more than most people who live in California because we have corporate headquarters there, and I go there pretty frequently. And I was born in Oklahoma, right? I'm a Midwestern boy. That state looks pretty damn good for not having any state tax.
Yeah, Sean's in Texas. I'm in Tennessee.
Yeah,
Nashville's a pretty beautiful city. I don't know what they're doing in California, but yeah, exactly. There's no income tax, and they're still able to provide essential services. So I don't know. What's the difference? Is it just how it's being spent? Is that the only difference, or are there other differences too? I don't really know.
Well, certainly the infrastructure and the amount of people in dense regions in California don't help, sure. But you have to look at, do you really feel like your opinion mattered in the last election? Or was it the Electoral College that came through and did that.
I think it's like
And I don't ask that
100,000
question.
people in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and I think their opinions matter.
Right,
Yeah.
but the Electoral College really runs that. And I go back to the whole idea of taxation without representation. Are your wants and desires really being represented by your politicians, your senators, the people in the House, your congressmen, or the president? And I would say in most cases, I think people, unless they're literally on one extreme side or the other, don't feel that's the case. And I'm sitting here saying, so where is your money going? In California, I mean, the homeless population out here has gotten so wild that you ask yourself, okay, is this really going to the things that I want it to go for? And if you're at the highest tax bracket in the country, I mean, I don't know that spending more money at higher taxes is going to fix that problem. It's probably your expenses. You're probably spending more money than you make on things that are being mismanaged at that point, right? If you came to me and said, Chris, look, I make more money than everybody in my family, and I'm running at a cash flow negative, or I'm breaking even every single time, I would say to you, hey, man, like, you're spending too much money, right? Like, these other people can live a totally normal life. Look at your cousin, Texas. Look at your nephew, Tennessee. They're living great lives, and they make less money than you. Yeah, they don't have like the nice cars and stuff like that, but they're doing okay. Your solution would be stop spending so much, right?
So would you like to see the government, the federal government, adopt like a zero-based budgeting strategy? And how do we, the people, get them to implement that? Because as I was saying earlier, every single administration, Republican and Democrat, has been increasing the federal debt, even going all the way back to Reagan, which conservatives herald as like the GOAT. He increased the federal debt too. So it's like, how are we ever going to stop increasing the federal debt? And then, as you were also saying earlier, I think most people don't have any kind of an understanding that when the Fed increases the interest rate, it makes our debt go up way faster as well, because they have to service the payments on that debt.
You can look up the national debt on Google, and you'll get plenty of charting from it. There's some from the local feds that are pretty impactful, and I think are pretty clear illustrations of what it looks like. And it is astonishing how fast it's moved up during this last interest rate increase period, which in the government's defense is somewhat unprecedented. And I don't know how you budget and plan for that. But look, you can't be a politically favorite politician. It goes to the core, and I know this is getting a little political in its entirety, but it does go to government bonds. You can't be a politician with a 4-year term and another 4-year term and expect to make long-term change over the course of that 8-year period. I know 8 years sounds like a long time, but you're not guaranteed the second 4 years. And in order to do something great in the 8 years, you got to do something great in the first 4 years to get reelected, or at least not be the bad guy. So I think there's a fundamental problem with the powers that keep going back and forth with their wants and desires. But no president, Republican, Democrat, liberal, I don't care what you are, you can go in and you're not going to have enough time, but you're certainly not going to get the popular vote if you start cutting back on all the spending.
I think that's kind of the fundamental flaw with, I mean, I'm not going to say like, republicanism or like republicanism as in the form of government or a democracy is a bad idea, but that is kind of the fatal flaw, is that it's easy to hand out carrots and get those votes. But when, those carrots rot and they become a problem and you got to find someone to, shovel the muck out and, fix it, it's really, really hard to sell solutions. It's much easier to, just kind of hand out free candy and get those votes, or just do something like that just seems nice, but doesn't actually do anything, rather than actually hunker down and get down to brass tacks and actually fix the problem, because generally that's going to cause some sort of pain, and pain will not get you elected.
And Sean, that's exactly it. That's exactly why I bring up the Industrial Revolution and what they taught people, and why I bring these things up is because why do you think they still don't teach us about financial literacy in school? It's not yeah, there you go. Probably better for it too. But the reality is they don't want us to question these things. The more you have your eyes open, and I know I've started to go down this conspiracy theorist path, and it sounds terrible, but the more you have your eyes open on this stuff, the more you're like, what in the actual fuck is going on, man? And I'll use a microcosm of my world. Is I watch CNBC all day long. I have a TV up here next to my screens in my office, and it's on all day long, mainly for the ticker. But, the banking sector has been under a lot of scrutiny lately. And I look at the screen, and I'm looking at these talking heads who are supposed to be held out as professionals. Some of them I know I had a guy yesterday who I won't name, who was on CNBC, who I know his entire financial profile. I know everything about him financially. I'm worth like at least 3 or 4 times as much as this guy. And he's over here like peacocking, talking about how he's the king of the world and how his investment opinion matters. And I'm going, you are so full of shit, dude. And I'm just looking at it going like, no, like this is ridiculous. And then you have these talking heads talking about banking, and you realize they don't know about banking. And these are seasoned professionals, smart people. I'm not knocking them. Good for them. They're on television. Good for their personal brands. If that gives them some ROI, good for them. But this is the problem with America in general, is you see people who look like an authority figure telling you this is good for you, and you go, oh, this person sounds articulate. This person sounds smart. But you get subject matter expertise, and you realize, like, this plan doesn't make any sense. But these are how politicians get in office, is they play off the things that we don't have a mass education on. When the Biden administration announced student loan forgiveness, I swear, you can go back to our show and listen to like episodes 10.
I remember. Yeah.
I was like, this is not legal. This is literally constitutionally prohibited. It is a Constitution Law 101. Similarly situated people treated differently. I kept telling people this is going to get overturned in court. Republicans are going to challenge this, and when they do challenge it, it's going to be ruled unconstitutional. Suck it, America. That's what it is. And everyone's like, oh, you're a hater. You're this. You're that. And I'm like, no, I'm just telling you. That's the law, dude. And sure enough, it came back. It was unconstitutional. I did a lot of shit talking on social media, and then he came back and did it in bits and pieces based on criteria. And again, good for you that's a legal way to do it. But this is how America's literally kept in the dark with so much, because look, people don't care about fiscal responsibility. They're not taught to care. Keep in mind, we grew up in a culture where $1.13 trillion in credit card debt, and no one's going like, that's a problem.
Yeah, the fear greed index is on greed right now, and it's like, how are people not scared?
Yeah, and look, we bastardize greed, and we call it a bad thing. And I'm not going to quote Wall Street and say greed is good and all that stuff. But what I am going to say is being internally invested and knowing about money has value, right? You guys are young. You don't have kids yet. I've got a son. Right? My son understanding money and the effects and value of money means so much to me. And I'll tell you a story about why. We work with a lot of very affluent families. We started off out of a wealth advisory firm, grew it into the bank, but we catered originally to high net worth clients. And we have a whole retail channel, everything else. We still got billions of dollars of assets under management, and we've got a lot of really high net worth and celebrity clients here at the bank. And some of them are in their legacy years where they're transitioning over to their kids. And one of the things we used to have is an on-staff psychiatrist whose job it was to kind of work through family issues and dynamics, especially through our trust department. And you would find the questions that the younger generation would ask would be so interesting and polarizing, because you'd be like, wait a minute. Like, you grew up around wealth. You grew up around money. But you actually know less about it than kids who grew up poor. And it's because they never had to think about it. And there was never a moment in school where somebody said, hey, you need to learn this. They just assume, like, you got it. You're good. Daddy's worth hundreds of millions. And they grew up their entire life paying cash for everything because they never had to utilize credit. So you look at the situation that we're in, and you go, okay, not only are we not teaching the kids who need to know it to learn and earn it, but you're not teaching the kids who have it. And it's just this weird thing where it became rude to talk about money. Well, that's a very convenient narrative for people who elect politicians in office who care a whole lot about money.
Yeah.
Right? And you start thinking about how this all unfolds, and you have an educational group which is lacking the education. And then it allows people to get in and spend more money, spend more money. So one of the things that's being highly criticized, back to the government bond issue, is that government spending has not gone down. Every year, the cap on the national debt has been raised. I think it's 80 times now it's been raised. Yeah. Right? And every single time there's all this, fanfare going into the news. Oh my God, are they going to raise it? We're going to have a government shutdown? Oh my God, what's going to happen? It's going to go dark in Washington. And then the 11th hour, the politicians all come together and they go, okay, we agreed. We're going to raise the debt ceiling by $1 trillion. And then the next week that money's spent. Right?
Sean and I always get these emails. It's like, oh, the government might shut down because our military pay is connected. And it's like, no, we'll get paid. It'll be fine. They're just going to raise it again.
Yeah, you're not going to. If you're a politician, I mean, talk about political nightmare. Don't be the politician who doesn't pay the military. You know what I mean? Like, don't be that guy. You know, like. But in any event, it winds up being this thing. And you saw during the pandemic what happens. We printed all this extra money.
Mm-hmm.
During the pandemic, you had unprecedented PPP, one of the stupidest programs known to man. It was so taken advantage of. You had all this stimulus. People were making more money being unemployed at home than they were going to otherwise to their jobs. More money. And it created this spending problem that we're now seeing on the debt side of things. But you printed all this money, and what happens? Inflation spikes up to 9.1%. Now, to solve the problem, what do? We start raising rates at an unprecedented cadence. We've raised rates by more money, or more percentage points over time. In the 1970s, a battle of hyperinflation. In the 1980s, a battle of double-dip recession. But you start raising interest rates, and it's 25 basis points, then 50, then 50, then 75, then 75, then 75. And you start raising interest rates, so you raise our national debt as a solution to this problem to bring inflation back down to call it 2 to 3%. And then you go, let's just see what happens next. I mean, these are not solutions. You're just robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a hot potato, just going back and forth, you know?
Yeah.
It's I mean, like I've known, I'm no expert on monetary policy, but you could tell something was a little odd about the way they were going. But that was a very succinct and clear explanation of exactly what happened. So I appreciate that.
Chris, we do want to respect your time.
All day.
We do want to respect your time since we're about 20 minutes over of what we asked you for. But we really enjoyed.
I didn't know you asked me for time. How much time did you guys originally ask me for?
15 minutes.
Is that what you asked for?
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
But yeah, we really enjoyed this. So thank you for joining us and explaining a lot of different things to our audience. And I guess we got one more question for you, if you got time before we go. Have you been buying a bunch of Airbus stock with everything that's happening with Boeing?
I have not been buying any Airbus stock. I have been considering short positions on a lot of things, but that ain't one of them. I will say the market's fascinating. I know we promised we'd go, but the market is fascinating to me right now, and I spend a lot of time looking at, especially the S&P. How much can I go a little long? You guys, All right. So one of the guys I have over here, his name's Roger, and Roger is Tom Cruise from Risky Business grown up. He's a stud. He's in his 80s, and he's every bit as cool as you can possibly envision. And Roger's really kind of a fixed income guy, and he's the guy who doesn't buy Apple because it's sensational. And if you look at some of the stuff that Warren Buffett has done historically, every time Warren Buffett, there's actually a way to measure, right, this technology spin. Like when Warren Buffett stops mentioning something as frequently, there's a couple year cadence where he stops like investing in it. So I've always looked at Roger and thought to myself, like, he's my Warren Buffett. He's my Oracle of Omaha. He's just in California. And I've always looked at the S&P 500 because of all the stuff that he's like, invest in things that are here forever. Invest in this, invest in that. And I keep looking at the S&P 500 and thinking to myself, like, some of these names aren't going to be here forever, dude.
Yeah.
Like, look at streaming services. Destroyed. They're destroying movie theaters, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Magnificent Seven, ooh, it's magnificent. The NVIDIA, they're going on what? An AI?
Yeah.
I know AI is scary.
It's a bubble.
Let's be real. It's best. It's a bubble, man. It's going to be used for porn, and then no one's going to want to talk about it anymore. It's going to be like, ooh, it's taboo. Don't talk about it. It's AI. It's porn. Ew. But that's what's going to happen. But I'm looking at this stuff thinking to myself, like, where is this market headed? You got the builders got it right this time. Their stock's soaring. You got AI, which is clearly propping up the market. You've got clearly the social media companies are doing something strange. TikTok may get banned. Mnuchin, of all people, the former Treasury Secretary, is going to step in and buy TikTok. What a weird time we're in right now, right? Anyway, there's plenty of room to come down in the S&P 500. I expect there to be a drop at some point in time, however palpable that may or may not be. But let me ask you a question, and we'll exit on this. And this is the thing that keeps me up at night. behavioral economics are really what influences the market. And retail traders, you can talk all the trash you want to on retail traders. They can do a lot of damage. Just ask AMC. Just ask GameStop.
Yeah,
Nick
was in on GameStop. He was in the Wall Street Bet Reddit. Yeah. And he bought GameStop at like $12 and rode it all the way up to 360. But we tell people not to day trade and do that kind of stuff on the podcast.
Yeah, don't be like us. Don't do what I say.
I was a Dogecoin guy.
I actually own Doge. I'm not gonna lie, I did own Doge.
Yeah, I still have it, and I have the new one. There's the new one. It's GOOO. It's like
I'm judging you so hard
a poorly pronounced name. I just put like $10 in for fun.
I'm judging you so bad right now. It's come on.
Don't tell Saeed, Chris.
Just wait till the next episode. As soon as Bitcoin hit 72,000, I called Saeed today. I'm like, hey, can you come down for a second? And he comes down here, and I'm like, hey man, how you day been? And we're talking, and I just turned the screen over to him. I'm like, you're gonna have to do a whole lot of shit apologizing on Monday, brother. I own a ton of Bitcoin. I own a ton of Ethereum at one point in time. I lost millions of dollars on it. Don't ask me about crypto. I lost stupid money on it, but it's a fascinating time, man. The markets are really, really, really wigging out. But to the point of the behavioral economics, if we cut rates, everyone's going to do the whole, it's a bull market, let's go. Is the market going to spike up at that point? Name a set of circumstances that's going to cause this to drop from historic levels now down. Like, what's going to cause that?
So my concern
like a
is
grid attack or something. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy.
Very feasible. Yeah.
Well, is that even with like the rates the way that they are now and inflation being as high as it is, because we all know that the number is way higher than it's reported. I think
20% increase in auto insurance in the last print. 20%. I'm saying the top. Just this bullshit. The top three in order. 20%. Okay, auto insurance. Okay, every American has got auto insurance. Fuck you, government. Thank you very much for that. Number two, rent. We're all paying rent or rent equivalent. Shelter is the number one contributor to inflation. Thank you, America. We're all paying that. Number three, eating out restaurants. Okay? Anybody says not eating out, you're a liar. Screw you. We all eat out. Okay? Those top three things.
It's crazy.
Led inflation. They were all above 8%. And we're like, oh, inflation's coming down. It's close to 2 and some change percent. You are lying to America.
I sent you that. I sent you that article from Market Watch last week, Chris, that said the study that they thought it was more like 18% still.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably everyday real expense to you, the consumer, is probably closer to 18, even 20%, depending on how your expenses are stratified. I think it's closer to 20% personally.
Yeah. But I guess long story short, essentially what I was going to say is that even if they do cut rates, I don't see the retail trader having the capital built up to really affect the market in a massive way, because I think that the pandemic like bonus checks, as well as the massive amount of PPP loans going out during coronavirus, was a huge aspect of people just having that free extra money to be like, to just YOLO it and like be like, yeah, I'm going to put 20 grand on AMC and just see what happens. I think people are a little bit tighter in the wallet in 2024 than they were in 2020. And I don't know if they've got the jet fuel that they need to.
I see it, but I was the same guy in 2022 late. I was at a symposium, credit officer symposium in New York at Raymond James, and they were going around the room, and everyone's like, "Oh, are the consumer spending? Consumer's great. And then Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, was all like, "Oh, consumer's super strong." And I'm like, "Are you guys all smoking the same crack? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, these guys are all fine." And I'm like, consumer spending's not. I mean, what are you talking about? And everybody looked at me like, of course, I'm dressed like a hobo and nobody cares. I look like an idiot. But that being said, I've been ringing that alarm for literally 2 years.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm an idiot because I sound like I'm wrong because consumers keep spending.
Yeah.
I'm not a Rivian. I'm a hypocrite. I get it.
Weights and Wealth will give you a break from ringing the bell. We'll take a shift.
Yeah. We're also going to have to make this our first explicit episode, but thank you, Chris.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, My pleasure, your fault, I guess. Whatever. Yeah.
Well, if you're okay with it, we'll try to do this again if our audience really enjoys it, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, and we'll have you guys on our show too. I think it'll be valuable. Plus, you can do the whole thing. If you guys are in Southern California, man, come out. We'll take you to dinner. We'll do the whole thing. Hawaiian ribeyes, brother. It's the way to go.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Take care, boys.
Bye.
So that was a pretty informative interview. I liked our discussion about the bond market, the Fed, how those
income tax,
how those work together. Like how Treasury rates are affected. That's gonna factor into obviously the housing market because the Fed controlling the interest rate controls your mortgage, which controls the price of houses. Not control, I should say, but influences heavily influences, which is why I would always argue that you can't have a free market with a controlled currency. It's impossible. It is intellectually dishonest to say that we live in a free market when the money can be turned on and off at will.
That is not the only reason why we do not have a free market.
But that is a very, 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 very significant reason why.
Yeah.
But what is free is losing weight.
I guess we can get into weight loss. So when you look at weight change or weight loss or weight gain, I'm going to put up a chart here that we'll keep putting up throughout the episode. But it comes from a Tesla Help post that I did a long time ago.
Way to toot your own horn.
Yeah. where we got a good chart from. So essentially what I did is for a 3-month span, I weighed myself every day and then noted the changes and graphed it on like a scatter plot so people could see that if you're going for weight loss or weight gain, it's never linear. It's going to bounce up and down. There's going to be bumps in the road. And I also did carnivore for a 2-week span during that time because one of my friends, a listener of the show, shout out Luke from Cincinnati, Ohio. He wanted to see what I thought about the carnivore diet. So this was a couple years ago. I was like, all right, I'll try it. And that's where you see at the end of the chart, the sharp decline in weight and the sharp gain in weight. And what that is it shows that simple things like eating less carbs or no carbs can heavily affect your weight, but it might not mean that you're actually losing fat or lean mass. You can just lose weight from water and salt and carbs being depleted from your body. So there's a lot of different factors that affect weight gain, and I guess that's really like the main point to talk about here. Weight gain and weight loss, there's so many different factors. How much sleep you got can affect your inflammation levels. What you eat can affect your inflammation levels. The amount of carbs you eat can affect how much water and sodium you hold on to. The amount of sodium you intake will affect how much water you hold on to. So all these different things are going to change that number on the scale. So the number on the scale every day is not a very good number to go by when you're trying to look at tracking for weight loss or weight gain.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. That's not necessarily reflective. You might gain weight, but if you're doing it right, it might be muscle, which inevitably is going to be healthier. Your resting metabolic rate will increase. You're going to look better. You're going to feel better. There's multiple benefits. So it's not maybe you cut all the crap out of your diet and then you actually gain weight because you finally fixed your macros and you're hitting 180 grams of protein a day to build muscle. And previously you'd only been hitting 50 grams, but you'd been hitting your 3,000 calories a day to maintain your weight, but you might actually gain weight but drop fat. Muscle weighs more than fat, we all know that. You might go up in the scale, but down in the waistline, we'll say.
Yeah, well, one of the guys that I work with just started doing carnivore, and he said over the course of a week or 2 weeks, he lost 10 pounds. Yeah. Largely probably because he's just not holding as much water. Also, likely less inflammation. Which and if you're just going for how you look, less inflammation. Like you're going to look better. Like your face isn't going to be as puffy, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're sitting there listening or watching and thinking, well, what should I look at then if the weight on the scale isn't a very reliable number? What I do with most of my clients is we'll have them weigh once a week. It really depends on their goal. Not all my clients weigh, not all my clients take progress pictures, right? But for like an average client that's looking for fat loss, what we're going to do is we have a weekly check-in where one morning a week they're going to be consistent, and as soon as they wake up, they're going to get on the scale and they're going to put that in the Tesla Help app so we can see it in the check-in, and then we'll have those numbers over time. And then over time we can look at, for every week, what the trend line is looking like. And then over the course of the last 2-3 weeks, are we going down, or are we going up, or are we staying the same? You can use these trends to see what direction you're going in. And if you look at the Tesla Help graph that we have here, the scatter plot, you can see like these trend lines. If you take that line on there between all the dots, you can see it goes up and down, but there's like a general theme for the first month and a half where it's going down when I was doing a cut, and then I did a bulk and it went back up, and then it goes on average down until I do carnivore where it sharply declines, and then I did bulk and it went back up. So you're not looking at the value of the dots. You're looking at the value of the lines over 2, 3, 4 week spans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just like fat loss, like the housing prices, they go up and down. Like they don't go up and down on a day-to-day basis. So you're not really tracking the line over course of like a month or a year, but you're tracking them like year to year. And I know Ted will put this graph up on the screen. But from I think 2002, 2003 to about 2012, that was kind of called the lost decade of the housing market, because housing prices didn't stay the same during that time, but from 2003 to 12 they were the same price, because we had that big housing crash in 08. And that's one of the things that can really affect housing prices is mortgage lending policies, because there were a lot of these subprime loans being given out, and then people started foreclosing, and then everything just kind of crashed. And then recently we see, in 2020 or 2019, the housing price there, the average price of a new build was about $390, and today it's about $540. And that's kind of because, COVID, or like from 2020 to 2022 was kind of like the perfect storm to increase housing prices, because we saw really low interest rates. We saw very high inflation, which is going to up the price of materials. We saw supply chain issues, which, for getting the materials, that's going to bump the prices up for that. We saw
stimulus checks where people were getting extra money to put towards down payments.
Lots of money was being pumped into the economy. And then on top of all that, we had really low interest rates. Yeah. So, the average price of a new build went up, $150,000, $160,000 on average. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the real inflation, I think, is a lot higher than what they put out, because housing is such a large part of people's expenses.
We talked about CPI before and how it excludes. It's housing and energy. What CPI excludes.
And food, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a bogus.
They can really manipulate it however they want to.
They changed the basket of goods. Like I think they changed it again in like 2020. Well, no, they changed the denominator. They changed like what they calculated the percentage change of inflation off of. So they were like, okay, we're gonna now measure inflation as the difference between 2005 and now, rather than 1980, which it was.
Like anyone that's not extremely wealthy can tell you that inflation has been very much affecting their bank account and their bills, and what you pay at the grocery store is not at all what it used to be a year or 2 years ago, right?
I used to be able to get like 60 eggs for like $2.50. Like that was the best.
I don't know where you were buying eggs.
It was awesome. Yeah, then at like the height of like inflation, I remember it was like $15. Incredible.
What, in Chicago?
No, in El Paso.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad. I had to stop buying eggs. I was very sad. It was like $4 for non-organic, a dozen eggs. I was like, what the hell is this? This is ridiculous.
Remember what was it, the big egg conspiracy?
Yes.
That was early on.
Purposefully killing chickens or something like that, or
to drive up the price of eggs. That was early days of the podcast. Yeah. If you want to learn about the big egg conspiracy, go back to the beginning.
Big egg, big way, big egg.
Nick, what can you tell us about? Like we talked about the trends for weight loss and weight gain. What can you tell us about the trends with interest rates and how that affects like whether you should buy or sell, or like how it affects the price of the house over time?
I mean, it's really a person to person thing. I mean, at the end of the day, a house is a utility. Like you need somewhere to live. So it's also just going to be relative to the price of rent in an area. For a while in like 21 and 22, it was cheaper to rent than to own. I think rent prices are coming up to meet the price of a mortgage. So, I mean, it really varies person to person what you can afford.
Yeah, that was one of the key things that Alex and I looked at because we wanted to start acquiring rental properties. So when we moved to Clarksville, we got a house, not knowing that we would be moving in a year. So that kind of was upsetting. But at the time, the ratio from rent to purchase in Clarksville, it made a lot of sense to buy. But now when we're looking at moving to DC now this spring, the ratio of rent to housing cost, it's so much cheaper to rent that it doesn't even make sense to consider buying a house. So I think that's a good point. That's a key metric that people can look at that varies by state and also by time, or in city and by time. So you can look up your city and like a chart of the current rent to home price cost, I guess.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and something else that can also really affect prices is regulation. You know, what the government decides to do. I know RFK was talking about federally backed mortgages, and with I think a 3% interest rate. So, I mean, if that happens, the price of housing is going to go up because now
if you think
people can afford
bad,
more.
If you think college is bad, just wait till you see what RFK does to housing. It's going to be a nightmare. The worst ideas that I've ever heard.
Yeah, but
still can't believe this guy wants to vote. Ridiculous.
Yeah, that does not seem like a good idea. I mean, we just talked about in the education episode how whenever the government gets involved in the price of something, it sounds like good intentions, but it just winds up inflating the heck out of the price of the good or the service. Whether it's healthcare or housing or education.
Or any type of material that the Department of Defense buys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, there's been audits where, like, they find that, like, X part was sold to SpaceX or, like, Ford for, $100, and it was sold to the DoD for, like, $400.
I have a specific example.
Yeah.
2 days ago, when we were in the office, we're looking at like a bookend thing on the cabinet shelf, and it still had the price sticker on it. It said it was $14.79 for this crappy little metal bookend that doesn't even work very well. And then we went on Amazon and found the same thing for like $4. So DoD overpaid for it by, what is that, 350% or 250%?
A lot.
Yeah,
that's why they need such a high budget. Such a big
but budget. It's government just inflates the price out of everything they get involved in. So, should we move on to the raffle?
Sure.
All right. The winner of this month's raffle is Garrett from Killeen, Texas. Garrett got multiple raffle entries from his comments on the social media. And also when he DM'd us and told us that he shared the podcast with 2 of his friends that started listening. So thank you, Garrett, for being a supporter of the podcast and sharing with your friends. If you would like to win the raffle, simply comment on the Instagram, post one of our reels to your story.
Tag us in it.
Make sure you tag us in it. Yeah, DM us and let us know who you shared it with. We'll get you in the raffle if you let us know. Should we move on to the book club for the month?
Sure.
All right. Yeah.
All right, so this month's book club for health, we got Ted's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And then for our wealth book, we got Cashflow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki.
Everybody knows Kiyosaki from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's a classic. This one kind of expands more into what kind of dad you want to be. You know, you might be the rich dad, but what kind of rich dad? You know, are you an employee? Are you self-employed or small business? Are you an inventor? Or are you working for a big business like a Fortune 500 company? There are multiple ways to achieve that, financial freedom and independence and like security that he talks about in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And this is kind of showing the different paths towards that.
Yeah, it's a good book if you think, well, I'm not going to be an investor that owns multiple real estate properties. That's not my goal. I don't want to deal with the hassle of that. Or I'm not going to own a 600 employee company, right? It shows that it goes through what to do if you're just going to be an employee and you don't really plan on having other business ventures or investments, how you can still invest and set yourself up for wealth creation success, no matter which quadrant you fit into.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Waite's book is The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This is, I would say, more of like a horror type of book. It's really shocking when you read it. He basically goes through the history of Anthony Fauci when he started in the government in the 70s, and goes through the entire history of his involvement with the AIDS crisis and how he kind of weaponized the NIH and the different arms of the three-letter government agencies to own patents for a bunch of these medical products so that the doctors and scientists that were working for the government were able to make a lot of money based off approving these drugs that had a lot of fraudulent research behind them. So it's a pretty scary book in terms of opening your eyes to big pharma and the revolving door between big pharma and the government agencies that are supposed to be protecting us, whether it's the FDA or NIH or whatever.
I am the science.
Yeah. But it shows you that Anthony Fauci didn't just screw up during COVID. He had a long track record of
Anthony Fauci is a hero in this house.
But yeah, if you want to learn more about Anthony Fauci, or about just not even about Anthony Fauci, but about how big pharma and the FDA and these different government agencies work with each other, or even internationally, World Health Organization, this book talks about all of it, and it's a scary read, but it's very eye-opening.
100%. So be sure to pick up Rich Dad's Cashflow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki, or
RFK's
The Real
book.
Anthony Fauci by RFK.
All right, we will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth. And don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.